Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I think the topic is very interesting, and before I start developing the actual topic, that is the challenges that we face in the global perspective, let me very humbly say that two of the challenges that I am going to face in this auditorium. The first challenge is whatever I am going to talk has already been spoken a lot by Chair himself. So it will be a mere duplication, and I don't know whether I will be caught badly or not. And the second and the most difficult challenge will be to keep the distinguished audience alive after the lunch. I mean, as I know that in the military, the biggest punishment you can give to your junior is to tell him that you better listen my lecture after your full-time lunch. And most of the military friends will agree. Anyway, with this humble submission and the realities, Mr. Chair, I would like to start my presentation. Mr. Chair, my fellow panelists and distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to everybody. Since the turn of the 21st century, in fact, the world has been witnessing major shifts, in fact, in the global political landscape, and we have already discussed this since morning. And the new wave of terrorism is fundamentally different from any other non-traditional security threats. We all agree and echo in the same tone. And the terrorists have been able to capture the lands, and they have been able to form foreign fighters and made mercenaries and presented a truly global, threat. On the other side of the spectrum, the clash of culture has led to the rise of right-wing populism and has shaken the political establishment in the West at their core. And the most remarkable examples of these profound changes are the rise of the populist US President Donald Trump and the United Kingdom's referendum in favor of Brexit. And the US retreat from the Paris Climate Accord, retreat from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, threat to stop support for NATO, and the budget cuts for the UN peacekeeping mission have raised serious questions as to the viability of the existing international order and the role of the United States as the leader of the free world. The impact of these changing dynamics have far-reaching implications for the future world and also for the future course of human history and international order. Hence, it remains to be seen how terrorism, the rise of right-wing populism in the West, changing balance of power and global leadership, the pursuit of sustainable development goals, and tackling the climate change alter the status quo in the international system. Having said that, let me tell you that I'll be basically covering these are the issues in very briefly. And although it says that the Bangladesh perspective, I'll come at the later stage of it, I would rather call it a perspective of the developing countries like Bangladesh. So with that, let me move to the first one, and it is terrorism. Extremism, terrorism, and what do we call it? The terrorist attack on the World Trade Center in the financial heart of the United States turned 9/11 into a watershed moment in the human history. The success of a non-state actor like Al-Qaeda to be able to strike in the mainland of the United States since after the attack in the Pearl Harbor of 1941 has brought the focus back on the controversial thesis, The Clash of Civilization, by the famous writer Samuel Huntington. And his argument of Western and non-Western values being inherently irreconcilable and a clash is inevitable can be criticized for being dogmatic and too often generalistic in nature. However, we cannot deny the fact that the global terrorism in the name of religion has taken the security challenges for the nation states to a next level. Hence, we are witnessing a paradigmatic shift in the global security spectrum. And in an attempt to reject this, the existing world order of liberal democracy, unlike its preceding ideological challengers like Stalinism, fascism, or Maoism, this violent religious extremism does not require an organizational base. It is rather decentralized and amorphous in nature. The rise of the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, that is called ISIS, and the declaration of the Caliphate by them in June 2014 brought an operational and philosophical shift which entails an inspired lone wolf can carry out an attack in allegiance to ISIS without any organizational authorization, training, or any kind of logistical support. And the global terrorist networks are exploiting the technology and infrastructure of the global connectivity to radicalize our young second-generation Muslims, especially the diaspora living in the cosmopolitan cities in the West, to take out the soft targets. It will be a major challenge for the law enforcing agencies across the globe to tackle the so-called jihadis who have joined the ISIS as foreign fighters once they come back to their home with enough of experience. The terrorist attack across the world has put the liberal democratic world system under serious security challenges. And we are actually witnessing that the so-called liberal democratic world system that was prevailing is basically looming in the form of right-wing populism. The increasing religious radicalization, terrorist attack in countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation, coupled with resentment against globalization process and the large influx of refugees from Syria and Libyan conflicts have ramped up the right-wing populism across the Northern Hemisphere. The backlash of globalization process was already felt by the Western societies since the global recession of 2007. And during the Brexit and the last year's election campaign, anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim rhetoric was used to shore up populist sentiment within liberal Western societies. The sharp increase in the vote share for the radical right populist party in Europe is the manifestation of this growing anti-immigration, anti-European Union, and xenophobic sentiments which override the liberal normative democratic values that the West had been, basically preaching since the time of the European Renaissance. And the recently held French election is an alarming example where two established political parties lost its political footing in the mainstream French political spectrum. Although the win of a centrist and a pro-EU leader, Emmanuel Macron, over the far-right and the anti-European Union candidate, Marine Le Pen, gave some relief to the liberals within the European Union. However, the massive support that a radical right populist party like National Front gained in this election is very, very significant. And there is no denying the fact that the difference between the winners and the losers of the globalization process has polarized the European societies. And with the end of the World War II, the formation and growth of the European Union signaled the win of regional integration over ultra-nationalism. However, since the Brexit and the rise of the populist wave across the global north, it remains to be seen whether the strength of European Union declined. Now about Trump, a populist wave that began with Brexit has reached the United States through the victory of Donald Trump. And Trump's rhetoric is full of xenophobic fear tactics against Mexicans and the Muslims, paranoid conspiracy theories about his rivals, and isolationist America First policies abroad. The rise of populist leaders like Donald Trump in the United States and the Marine Le Pen in France is altering the established patterns of party competition in contemporary Western societies. But we need to reflect on what are the issues that brought Trump to the White House. Immigration and trade seem to be at the top of the list. His whole campaign was based on popular hostility to liberal immigration and free trade policies. These political changes in a country that has led the free world and democracy have profound consequences for the global peace and environment. Nevertheless, Trump can be good for geopolitical stability in a short term because he is likely to allow China and Russia more roles to play. Trump could give Russia a free rein in its own sphere of influence, such as in Ukraine and Syria, in exchange for restraint in Central Europe and the Baltics. China's inevitable dominance in Asia could be accepted by Trump, provided China avoids outright wars with Japan, Taiwan, and other countries whose security is guaranteed by treaties with the United States. The Middle East is bound to remain an epicenter of geopolitical unrest in the foreseeable future. The bottom line is the rise of Trump will give signal to some significant change in international politics and alter the existing balance of power. What matters in the international balance of power system is opportunity for prosperity and security. If China offers more opportunities for prosperity and security, countries will naturally be attracted to the Chinese magnet. Therefore, a genuine analysis of balance of soft power between China and United States is not much different from an analysis of their economic and security potentials. Despite the global financial crisis in 2007, Chinese economy has been growing almost at a double-digit rate, although it has come down in the recent past. As the United States signals to become isolationist under the leadership of the populist Donald Trump, China is becoming more outward-looking in terms of investment and reaching out to more countries in Africa and South America. Trump's America First policies, his threats to crack down on abuse of so-called free trade, and his withdrawal from the Paris Climate Change Accord could seriously undermine America's ability to lead the world. His policies also might weaken the existing security architecture in Europe and elsewhere. For example, before election, Trump stated that the US military support for NATO member states would be conditional on whether those states have met their financial obligation to the organization or not. This comment regarding an organization that has served as the cornerstone for global security since the World War II represents a marked departure from the US policy since NATO's inception in 1949. It is yet to be observed if he ultimately retreats from this position. It nevertheless highlights America's isolationist outlook, and Eastern European states which are dependent on NATO's security umbrella and security guarantees from Russia's military clout will be apprehensive regarding their future security arrangement with the so-called free world. And ladies and gentlemen, another grave concern for the global peace and harmony would be the UN budget cuts for the UN peacekeeping missions around the world. Due to Trump's administration's insistence, the Budget Committee of the United Nations agreed to cut down $600 million from the organization's nearly $8 billion budget. And this event sent a wrong message to the free world that an unwilling leader is reluctant to take the responsibility to maintain global peace and stability. The biggest blow to the United States leadership was the decision to pull out from the Paris Climate Accord. By doing so, Trump has created a vacuum of global leadership that presents ripe opportunities to reorder the world's power structure. His decision is perhaps the greatest strategic gift to China, who are very eager to fill in the leadership void. And speaking only 2 months after the election, US President Donald Trump announced plans to withdraw from the so-called Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Chinese president urged the whole world and the world leaders in World Economic Forum meeting in 2017 to reject the protectionism threatening multilateral trade agreements and embrace the win-win potential of interconnected growth. In Davos, he expressed China's strong commitment to make globalization work for everyone and not just the few, in contrast to the policy of Mr. Trump. However, that is what my understanding, as I understand, that perhaps China still cannot match the Washington's military reach or cultural appeal. The reality is, under the current global environment, it will be very difficult, not only for China, rather for any country or any major power to take the leadership role in absence of the United States. Now, another important issue is the SDG. Today morning, our chair, the first plenary session chair, has spoken a lot about it. The world has taken the ambitious 2030 agenda, a historic agreement to end the poverty, combat inequalities, promote peaceful and inclusive societies, and protect the most important issue is the environment. And implementing the SDGs will not only require investment on a massive scale, but also strategic planning, technological innovation, and massive monitoring. The Sustainable Development Goals have raised the international community's ambition, especially for many countries like Bangladesh and others who are developing. Estimate of their costs reach into the trillions of dollars. While city governments' responsibilities vary by nation, they are often the ones feeling the pressure of having to deliver basic services from water and sanitation to affordable housing, while the urban population are on the rise. But the question of how the local governments can access the new sources of finance, both from domestic and external sources, particularly to meet the climate finances, has not yet received the attention it really deserves. Now about the climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, the climate change has created more competition among the growing global population over sacred food, water, and land. It will also trigger new security competition. A melting Arctic Ocean means a new coastline to be defended. It means open competition among the bordering nations of North America, Europe, and Asia for oil drilling rights in the Arctic. On the other hand, many island nations would lose much of their landmass, while some might completely disappear in future. No security issue is more grave than the threat posed by the climate change. Politics is also intricately linked with climate change. A shift in global leadership and balance of power would also imply that climate change politics would be intensified, and it will further drift the great powers apart. For examples, former US President Barack Obama endorsed the United Nations Green Climate Fund, which was created as a financial institution to help developing countries combat the adverse impacts of the climate change. It was likely to help the whole world, especially the LDC countries, the least developing countries. And Trump has halted US donation to this fund, saying that it would drain out the US taxpayers' money. Therefore, we have two very serious problems in our hand. One that threatens the existence of mankind and redrawing of the maps, and the other one is the lack of global leadership to unite the world under a common umbrella to tackle the climate change. I will now move to the last part of my presentation. As I said, it is not only Bangladesh perspective, rather the perspective for all the developing countries like Bangladesh. As the US global leadership shifts away from free trade, globalization, and open market, the developing countries like Bangladesh should be concerned regarding the rippling effect of a systematic power shift. Nobody can predict the full effects of the change in global economic management, but they will surely be negative for emerging economies whose development strategies are based on free trade and open capital flows. Given the likelihood of additional trade protectionism and measures to remove immigrant workers, the increase in inflation and long-term interest rates could be quite dramatic. The impact on the financial markets will be disruptive. The Paris Agreement does not impose enforceable financial obligation on the specific parties. However, developed countries were expected to provide financial resources to help poor countries develop in a sustainable way and protect their citizens from the impact of climate change. The developing countries like Bangladesh will be the worst affected country by the adverse consequences, a problem created not by developing countries like Bangladesh, but by the developed countries. In an intensified globalized world, Bangladesh is not out of globalized world, Bangladesh is not out of the danger from radicalization and the global terrorist threat. In this regard, extensive cooperation with fellow victim nations of Bangladesh and our government has been working on both ideological and operational front to tackle the threat. However, a global rise of terrorism and Syrian refugee crisis has instigated the rise of right-wing populism across the Northern Hemisphere. In effect, a harsh immigration policy in Europe and in the United States means middle-income countries like Bangladesh will face a difficult period who depends on foreign remittance, transfer of technology, as well as skill and education of their expatriates. A drastic reduction of migrants from the global south to the global north will have direct impact on some of the most important goals of the Sustainable Development Goal, like Goal 4, which says about quality of education, Goal 8, which talked about decent work and economic growth, and Goal 9, which talked about industry, innovation, and infrastructure. And last but not the least is the UN peacekeeping, and this is the only thing which is a prospect, I think, for a developing country like Bangladesh. Rest all are basically a challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, since 1988, Bangladesh has been one of the highest troops contributor in global peacekeeping operation under the UN banner. And I was one of the first peacekeepers from Bangladesh in 1988, and I was a small captain. To strengthen Bangladesh's global presence in order to uphold the global peace, it is imperative to find a strong footing in command and decision-making process of UN peacekeeping effort. The transition is justified by Bangladesh's sacrifice and industrious effort to safeguard global peace. The global dynamics are changing, and we can observe a change in the global leadership as well. Nations like Bangladesh, who were less fancied, are now punching above their weight to bring sustainable peace and prosperity. And influenced by such nations like Bangladesh will also contribute in changing the dynamics in the global environment in future. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That's all from my side.